Hola, soy María Pía Chirinos, directora de la Oficina de Relaciones Institucionales y Alumni de la Universidad de Piura. En esta ocasión queremos invitar a todos los egresados y a los amigos de la Universidad de Piura a las charlas virtuales gratuitas que estamos organizando desde la Oficina de Egresados.
Muy buenas noches a todos, bienvenidos a una nueva edición de los seminarios web de Alumni. Somos la oficina de graduados de la Universidad de Piura y queremos darle la más cordial bienvenida a este nuevo seminario web con un tema de muchísimo interés para todos nuestros egresados, especialmente de la Facultad de Derecho y también, obviamente, de personas vinculadas al rubro empresarial. En esta oportunidad nos acompaña un expositor internacional, un expositor de lujo, y además el webinar estará comentado por varios profesionales del sector también muy importantes y a los cuales les agradecemos muchísimo que nos acompañen. Quiero recordarles que les saludamos de parte de Alumni, la oficina de graduados de la Universidad de Piura. A la fecha somos más de 14,000 graduados alrededor del mundo y nosotros como oficina lo que buscamos siempre es brindar la mejor calidad de contenidos y la mejor calidad de servicios y beneficios para toda nuestra comunidad de graduados. Como expositor central esta noche nos acompaña John Chisholm, es director ejecutivo de Innovim Group, miembro del VeraSage Institute y profesor de la Trobe Law School. Además, este webinar cuenta con los comentarios de Verónica Arbolú, Oscar Montezuma y Sebastián Soltao. Verónica es abogada por la Universidad de Lima, gerente de Asuntos Legales y Comunicación Externa de Statkraft. Oscar Montezuma es máster en Derecho por the George Washington University, director y fundador de Newbox, y Sebastián Soltao es máster en Derecho por the George Washington University y profesor de la maestría en Derecho Procesal de la Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. Le voy a ceder la palabra a Oscar Montezuma, una de las personas que comenta esta noche, y los dejamos entonces con esta presentación. Muchísimas gracias, John, y muchísimas gracias a todos los panelistas que hoy nos acompañan.
Estás en mute, Oscar.
Tu audio. Bienvenidos.
Voy a hacer el cambio ahora al inglés. Muchas gracias a todos por participar. Thank you all for joining. I think that, and especially to Roger and all the team at Universidad de Piura, because they have been like very helpful in arranging this webinar. And well, John, we're very glad to have you here. We have around 56 people willing to learn from all your knowledge and thoughtful comments on pricing. We've been speaking for a while now, so well before this webinar, and exchanging ideas on this topic that is a pioneer topic really in Peru and Latin America. We lawyers are not used to talk about the billable hour, about the way we price our services. And I think that if we are starting to talk about innovation in law, this is a must topic. We have to see other options, because normally the only thing that we have in our heads as lawyers when we learn how to price our services is bill by the hour or sell time. So with that brief introduction, I would like to give you to welcome you, and we're happy to hear this first introduction that you're going to make on this topic.
Thank you very much, Oscar, and thank you all for having me via Zoom. I do apologize. I would like to say my Spanish is not very good. It's basically non-existent, so you'll just have to put up with my Italian Aussie slang. So I hope you can understand me, and I'm sure Oscar will interpret if there's anything you don't understand. Look, it really is a privilege to be able to speak to you, and I guess, as Oscar said, pricing our services as lawyers up front is something that believe it or not, at least in Australia and some other countries, we used to do up until at least in Australia 30, 40, 50 years ago when the billable hour came in to existence. And I'll talk a bit about that. I just want to emphasize, I suppose the topic here is pricing for law firms. Are we selling time or selling something else? I have to say, clients don't buy time from us as lawyers. And look, if you don't believe me after this session or tomorrow, go and ring your best client and ask them what they buy from you. And I guarantee they won't say they're buying your time. It may be how we're selling our services, but that's not what they're buying. And I think as a profession, we just have to stop selling something our clients don't buy. If I sound like a reformed smoker, it is, because even though I'm old enough to remember, just old enough to remember time before hourly billing, how I practiced as a partner in a law firm, as managing partner and chief executive, was in what I call the old law business model. And that is, we leveraged people by time, by hourly rate. It was profitable, successful, it still is. And I guess, you know, as a managing partner, if I could increase my lawyers' hourly rates each year more than what my expenses were being increased, even given, you know, 60 or 70% utilization, the firm could make a healthy profit. And this all worked fine and still works fine, I understand, for some firms. For so long as, you know, clients didn't complain about our bills, so long as clients were happy to pay whatever hourly rates that we imposed upon them, the amount of time we spent on something and the number of lawyers we used on a matter. But the world did change. There were some clients who did complain. And I have to say, even when I was running law firm as a managing partner, I would too often get drawn into that awkward conversation between a client on the one hand and perhaps a partner on the other, trying to resolve a complaint from a client that felt they got charged too much or more than what they were expecting, or the fees exceeded the estimate the partner had given. And they weren't very pleasant conversations. Invariably, there had to be a compromise or what have you. And I never liked that. Also, it took me a while to understand, but again, I think not just in my firm, but in the profession generally, the hourly billing created unfortunate deleterious effects, particularly on cultures of firm. And, you know, it fosters what I call a production mentality. And that's understandable, don't get me wrong. The firm's going to make more money the more time that's put into something, and the measurement and reward system in many firms out there for partners and lawyers, fee earners, I don't like that terminology, was principally built around time. So I guess no surprises then that the billable hour often tempted otherwise ethical professionals to do some unethical things. And I guess you know what I'm talking about there. But what I didn't appreciate, particularly when I was practicing, but I do now after talking about this for 12 years or more, is that speaking to some really good lawyers, really good expert lawyers that were charging by time, they often left incredible value on the table. Basically, they couldn't even lie enough on their timesheets to capture the value that they were, or fair proportion of the value that they were giving their clients. And I think it's been quite demeaning to lawyers as a profession that in many cases our sole worth is just determined by the unit of time we're putting into something. And that's wrong. It's not how the rest of the business world operates. When I left mainstream law back in 2004, and quite frankly, I was burnt out, and I spent the next 5 months with my wife driving around Australia. And I was wondering what I was going to do with the next, my next career. And it wasn't going to be running law firms again. I was asked by some managing partners of other law firms, John, while you're working out what you're going to do, can you come and give us a hand? You know something about management and leadership and how law firms work. Can you give us a hand on projects. And I said, yeah, sure, I'm happy to do that. And then they said, so what's your hourly rate? What are you going to charge us? Now, I think I became managing partner of my law firm because I was shite at filling out timesheets. I was terrible, but I could make everyone else in my firm fill out timesheets. So consulting or doing projects to other firms, I wasn't going to carry around a timesheet. And they said, all right, well, why don't you give us a price for the project? I started to panic. I didn't know what the price was, what a fair price would be. So believe it or not, for the first 2, 3 or 4 projects I did as a consultant back to law firms, I just said to the managing partner or whoever instructed me, look, just pay me what you think I'm worth at the end of the project. And that turned out to be very interesting because I was getting paid more than what, if pressed, I would have priced my own services at. Now, maybe it was because they felt sorry for me because, you know, I was unemployed or starting out, or maybe it was because I created more value for my clients than even what I had anticipated. Now, my accountant, to be frank, didn't think this was a great business model, but the way things worked out this is back in 2005, I went to a conference in Sydney, Australia, and there was an accountant there talking about value-based pricing. He was an accountant, became a good friend of mine, Paul O'Byrne. He sadly passed away a few years later, but Paul talked about value pricing, and it was like my aha moment. Where have you been all my life? I'd never heard of the concept. Even pricing, the firms that I ran, we never used the word prices. We used fees or rates or cost. None of those that are really pricing. And he talked about what his firm did, how they moved from basically an hourly rate model to clients onto fixed fees or fees in advance. And I was intrigued. For 2 days in Sydney, I followed Paul around, asking him questions. 2 months later, I flew to London. I spent 2 weeks with his partners, his firm, his team. He gave me full access to his clients. He introduced me to other professional firms around the world. Sadly, there weren't many law firms doing this at the time, back in 2005, but there was a community of professional firms that realized there's a better way of practicing their craft rather than retrospective billing in arrears, pricing your services up front. So that's really how I got into this over the years with both Paul O'Byrne, and I was introduced to a guy called Ron Baker that some of you may have heard of. He's by far the world's leading expert in value-based pricing in professional firms. He founded the VeraSage Institute back in 2001, which is professionals like me and David Wells, who is online, my colleague from Australia. We're both senior associates of that organisation, and it has grown in terms of the professional firms, including law firms, that now have not only ditched the billable hour, but have ditched timesheets in their firms. And you know, perhaps David could talk about certainly the firms that he was managing principal of, and what they did and the improvements, the benefits it had for both them and the client. But I guess value-based pricing in its most simplistic terms is pricing your services upfront based on the value you're providing to your client, not about the time that we're spending on things. It's about looking at things from your client's perspective, what value you are providing to your client. Just because, sadly, I spend more time working on something doesn't necessarily mean I add value to my clients. Equally, just because I spend less time doing something doesn't mean I add less value. And the work that I do with professionals all over the world, including law firms, is trying to break that nexus between time and value, and certainly time and price. I know it's not easy. It's not as hard as what we make out. I certainly had to do it. So I know it can be done. And again, I'm just talking simplistically at the moment, but value, like beauty, is subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder. So what we think about value as lawyers may not be what our clients think. So it's incumbent upon us, I think, as good lawyers, to find out what's important to our client. We call this having a value conversation up front with your client. In my day, when a client came, we would take instructions, get straight into doing the matter, whatever it was. These days, certainly under a value pricing, I think under any pricing model, we have to have a conversation with our client. We call it a value conversation. That means finding out what's important to our client, what they value, what their objectives, ultimate objectives are for them engaging us as lawyers. At best, all we can do is influence our client's perception of value, because, as I said, value is subjective. Basically, under a value pricing model, you would have this value conversation with your client. You'd have a conversation about the scope of work. You would agree on the value and the scope of work, and then you would agree on a price or prices. Now, I don't want to get too complicated, but certainly over the years, the work I do with firms, if it's possible to give your clients options in what you do, 3 options is fantastic. There's never a perfect price, so we have to forget about any concept that there's some perfect price. There is a range of acceptable prices to any client, and if we can capture the range of prices, perhaps by giving our clients 3 options, preferably 3 options, each with different benefits and each with different prices, the client then can choose which option suits them best, rather than us forcing something on a client. And when you provide your clients with options, they consider much more how they're going to work with us rather than whether they will work with us. So I don't want to confuse that at the moment, but we're a big believer in providing our clients with options, I have to say. Then once you agree on the scope of work, the option, you document that in, I'm not sure what the proper terminology would be in Peru. In Australia, we call it cost agreement or price agreement. And then you just get on and do the work. Now, if the scope changes, so may the price. But the scope should only change if it's a material change. Just because, I've taken 6 minutes or an hour longer to do something doesn't necessarily mean that the scope has changed and I'm going to charge the client something. But that's basically how it works. And the work that I do with lawyers is not only helping them understand more about the value they're providing to their clients, but also about how they can capture a fair proportion of that value. Our clients have to make a profit out of using our services. And if they can't make a profit out of using our services, we're probably the wrong firm for them. So there must be something left over for our clients. And I just think it's a more ethical way of running our practices. It gives more certainty and predictability to our clients. I mean, in many cases, our clients come to us with they're stressed in a legal situation. And I have to say, as a profession, or at least in Australia, we often add to that stress because we can't tell them how much something is going to cost them. And I think, if the predictability and certainty around fees is great for clients, it's also great for the law firm. It's like having money in the bank rather than waiting at the end of the month to do a bill based on time in arrears and then hope to hell that our client, when they get the bill, sees that they've got value. It's how the rest of the business world operates with pricing their services up front. More and more law firms around the world are doing it, particularly small law firms. And it's a great marketing point of differentiation too. If you can put your hand on your heart and say to your clients, in our firm, you will never ever receive a legal bill that you have not pre-authorized, I think that's a fantastic thing that you can say. And if your competitors, I wish the whole world operated like that, the whole law firm world operated like that, but they don't. So at the moment, it's a great advantage for you know, early adopters in a very, very competitive marketplace. So I guess, Oscar, I'll stop talking now in terms of that, but that's just certainly how I got into this pricing. I am pleased to say that the legal world is changing. It's not changing enough. I think at least in Australia and the work I do in the US and the UK with COVID, that has meant that, you know, clients understandably want more for less, but particularly they want more certainty and predictability around their legal fees. And if we can offer them that and still make a profit, then I think that's great for both our clients, for ourselves, and for our profession in the future.
Great. So thank you, John. I really enjoyed everything you mentioned and took notes of some of the tips that I will, of course, practice. And my first question to you will be, I really like the part where you said that you agreed with your clients upfront on the value of the services. But what happens when there is something urgent, you know, like high stakes legal work that needs to be done like urgently? Would it make sense to use like an hourly rate for those cases?
Yeah, that's interesting, Veronica, because if it's high stakes and it's urgent, when you think about it, we're probably leaving even more value on the table if we're doing it by time. We can't lie enough on our timesheets. I do understand that sometimes there is urgent matters, but there are ways, you know, ways around that. Some of the firms I work with have retainer agreements or subscription arrangements with their clients, so they can, you know, the client pays over a 12-month period, you know, whatever, and that is irrespective of how, you know, often the client uses them or whatever. It's just we pay subscription models for everything in the world now. But it's interesting. I think there is not as many urgent matters, particularly if it's high stakes, as we think. Now, I'm not saying that there's not. You could, for instance, if something was urgent, do whatever is required to get to a certain point, you know, to allay the client's fears, or do something that has to be done today. And maybe you just agree, you know, that's $1,000, $500, or what have you. If it's not much time, I prefer you not to use an hourly rate. But even if you say that it's a fee, then when you get to the stage that there's other things and you know more what you've got to do to help the client, then I think you can start pricing the work. I'm not necessarily suggesting that we can price things all the way through. A lot of the firms that I work with price in phases or milestones, or so that we could price to this stage and then, you know, see where we're going there, and then, you know, go to the next stage, agree on the scope of work to the next stage with the price. But at all times, Veronica, it's still agreeing the price up front. So it gives the client the opportunity. If a client doesn't like our prices, when are we better off knowing as lawyers? Before we've done the work or after we've done the work? If it's after we've done the work, then I'm sorry, I'd probably have to go begging to you as my client to, you know, try and convince you to justify the the fee that I've charged. Some firms, let's be frank, have a hybrid model to say, oh, come Monday morning, we're going to stop billing by time, or we're going to turn off the timesheet. I do understand that. There's contractual arrangements with clients, and you know, I'm not suggesting I'm a great pricer, but it takes, excuse the pun, takes a lot of time to change the mindset around to looking at value from and output and outcomes and results, rather than what I used to think about was time, activities and input. So there's a mindset change with that, and that does take time to get into a firm, and we have to experiment. We will make pricing mistakes. Most firms do now. They're called write-offs. But I think that firms, and if David Wells gets an opportunity to talk, most of the firms I've worked with that have made the transition over a period of time from billing by time to pricing their services up front, if you ask them, would they do things differently? Most of them would say they would turn off their timesheets sooner than what they did, because the timesheets, with the best will in the world, still make us default to time. So from both a lawyer's perspective and also from a client's perspective, I would hope, and we might talk about this, that don't ask lawyers anymore for their timesheets, but they ask them for, you know, what value they're providing, what are the results, what are the outcomes, and can we agree on, you know, fixed price or some form of upfront pricing.
Hi, John.
Hi,
So I'm going to be playing sort of a devil's advocate role now. So I would like to put sort of a hypothetical scenario. And we talked about this in the past, but I think it's important for everyone who's joining us today. So let's say I'm a managing partner or a partner at a big law firm that still uses hourly rates, hourly billing, and hasn't really focused on value pricing, but they're doing very well. So they're making money, the model works. In that scenario, John, what would be the business case for value pricing? So, because you've mentioned a couple of things that if I'm in that position, you said it is hard, it takes time, you need certain skills. So will I end up making more money or not? Or what are other considerations that you think that person should be taking into account?
Yeah, and look, I understand, Sebastian, particularly at the bigger end of town. It's hard to tell a room full of millionaires that their business model sucks. Does that translate?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and I do understand that, but I think there's all these other deleterious effects. Again, I can't talk about what's happening in your country, but I know from Australia and the work I do in the US and the UK, we lose so many good lawyers from our profession, if for no other reason, because, you know, they have to account, at least in Australia, for every 6 minutes of their working day. I mean, we say we employ or engage the most creative and the brightest and the smartest from law schools, and yet what do we do when they get into, we almost lurch that creativity out of them, because we make them account, and their whole reason for being basically is based on the time they spend, their measurements, and their reward is based on time. I do understand that, but what I would, so that I think it's a better culture within firms that have got rid of billing by time. They're much more collaborative, flatter structures. We talk about teamwork. I mean, honestly, you know, collaboration in many law firms, despite what they may say on their website, is non-existent. I mean, timesheets are the most innovation and collaboration killers you could ever, you know, imagine, really. But I think what now some clients are making the them change. I wish that wasn't the case, but there are, even at the big end of town now, clients saying, well, if you can't tell us what this is going to cost us, we'll go to a firm that can, because more and more firms, even at the big end of town, are prepared to give fixed prices or something up front. So the world is changing. Also, I have to say, the firms that I've worked with, I don't do this because I want the firms to lose money or become less profitable. Many of those firms have increased their profit, even if they haven't increased their prices to their clients. They've invested in technology think about it. I'm a law firm, I'm going to invest in technology to make things happen quicker. I'm still going to bill by time. Just doesn't make any business sense. It might to Veronica as a client, but my investment in that my profit in that investment goes straight out the window to our client. But I think the work we do also with clients of law firm, it's just a much better client relationship. Clients not worrying about the clock all the time. We're not worrying about it. There's no surprises. And I have to say, anecdotally, when you agree your prices in terms of payment up front with your clients pay quicker. And for many of the small law firms I work with, Sebastian, that alone, having that, cash is king, that better cash flow is fantastic. And sure, we've got to do the work that we've agreed to do. And if we don't do the work, then we deserve everything we get. But I think one of the other great advantages, you just don't have cost disputes with your clients. And again, I can't talk about Peru, but here in Australia, if there's a costing dispute and it either goes to the firm or it goes to a legal services commissioner or an independent arbitrator, it's an awful situation to be in. Trust takes a real hit. So you may have other disputes with your clients, like, if you don't do the work properly, but to never have a cost dispute is just fantastic. And again, for those, I'm sorry, I'll stop frothing at the mouth, but what I call the time machine in most firms is really expensive. Most practice management systems are built around time. They cost money, filling in timesheets, manipulating the time, all those sorts of things, having discussions with clients as to whether, the time put on the clock is fair and reasonable. If you can take all that away, that's a huge administrative burden anyway, even forgetting about relationship burden. And some of the, anecdotally, we think between 10 and 15% of a firm's gross is spent on feeding the time machine. Now, if you can, take that away and spend that on better technology or better servicing your clients or better being more competent and confident in your pricing skills, I think that's great. And the more confident and competent lawyers get with the value they're providing in their pricing skills, timesheets just become redundant. They really do. So yeah, I think at some stage in the future, I still hope that I'm alive, to see this, that big global firms will make the business model change. But, I wouldn't care if I was running a law. I wouldn't care what my competitors are doing. I'd be looking at what's best for me and for my clients and for the way I practice law. I just might add, I think accounting firms and consulting firms are further down the track than law firms. And these days, when we have much more merging of the professions, the big four, at least the legal, the big four accounting firms are doing some really creative pricing arrangements with their clients. I think, even the parts of their law firms that they own will start doing that. And, global firms are starting. But I have to be frank that to date, most of the really innovative, creative change business model has come from smaller law firms. I think that's fantastic. So it's come from the bottom rather than the top. And that's because, let's face it, probably most of them were not too good at filling out timesheets and probably weren't making the millions of dollars that some of the partners in some of the big law firms were making anyway.
Thanks, Oscar.
So John, yeah, and well, I agree a lot with you. I can testify that it is possible to abandon this model. We did it 2 years ago. We do not believe at all in any type of time tracking mechanism, and I can say after 2 years that it works. That we have been able to run a firm with this mechanism, and it provides a lot of advantages in terms of culture within the team, in terms of focusing on value on the client, and that's something that is really it's great, because when you talk to clients and when you understand their needs and they like this way of working, you avoid all this tough conversations at the end of each month, when the list of hours, the balance of hours gets to the client, and they say, well, what's happening here? Why there are two people doing the same thing? Why? So every month you have all these tough discussions, and Veronica may have had many of these conversations, and they are not comfortable for anyone, neither for the lawyer, not for the client. So yeah, but one of the things that maybe people are asking is, what skills do you think are needed for value pricing, for doing value pricing, for reaching that number that maybe it's very difficult now to picture, to say, okay, so how do I get to that number if I don't measure time? What skills do I need to get to that magic number?
Sure. Yeah. No, look, it's a fair question. How do I answer it in the time we've got left? Certainly, it is a mindset change and it is a business model change. It's not just a billing model change, Oscar, as you've talked about. So we do have to start to think differently. Certainly, one of the most important, and what we focus on, or I focus on, is assisting lawyers to have that value conversation with their clients. And a lot of that is about asking questions and listening, not making statements about how good I am as a lawyer or whatever. I mean, one of the best, what I call value questions that you can ask a client is something along the lines, look, if price wasn't an issue, what would you like us to do for you? So take price off the table. Have your client say, look, if you lawyers weren't so expensive, that sort of stuff. So I think it's a great, one of the great questions we can ask. I have to say, though, also, when you agree on the price and the scope, project management is critical. And a lot of when I ran law firms, we didn't have the concept of project management. So long as the client was prepared to pay, the hours, both the rate and the time spent in, you really didn't have to project manage. But if I've got a fixed price or what have you, and my team knows about it, we know what we've got to do. Yeah, I want to get that done within the timelines. And I've got to be frank, probably from Veronica's point of view or client's point of view, if a client's worried about time, it's more elapsed time rather than the time we're putting into something. I mean, if I make a promise to get something to Veronica by next Friday, I don't want her to be finding out how much time I'm putting into that, except that I'm going to meet my commitment and do what I said I'm going to do and get that by next week. So we do have to be better at managing our workflows. I think it's been a cop-out, and I was part of this as a profession, that when you had the timesheets, there was some, it put in some barrier for proper project management. And, timesheets, once something hits the timesheet, the horse is bolted. Timesheets are looking in arrears. Project management is looking, forward planning. And I'm not saying time is not important for capacity planning, estimating time in advance. Sure, I understand that for capacity planning, but again, that time doesn't necessarily and shouldn't necessarily reflect the value we're providing to our clients. And just one other thing I'd say, I work with a lot of firms that do fixed pricing, but some of those fixed pricing are based on estimated time in advance. And as human beings, we're terrible at estimating time in advance. We always underestimate how long it's going to take us to do something. So if you're basing your price or your fixed price, it'll always be wrong in that sense. So yeah, it's what I call billable hours in disguise. So again, breaking that nexus. And you know, you may want to stop me now, but when you think about it, just because I put more time into something is not an additional cost to me. It may be an inconvenient, I may not have planned it, but you know, for most firms, it's not an additional cost. And smart, sophisticated clients have worked this out now. It's not an additional cost.
And in terms, that's a great point, because one of the toughest conversations I've had has been with my accountants, you know, and one of the few accountants that I've seen talking about value pricing is Ron Baker, you know, and that's something that I think, I don't know if it's because they are educated that way, that you have to always take into account costs, and time is a cost. And when I talk to them, there's normally this thought that when you introduce more or fill more hours into a software platform for time tracking, you're increasing your costs. And this has been a long conversation with accountants to say, okay, then shouldn't it make more sense that you charge, you compensate your team, your lawyers by hour, and you sell hours? That will be more coherent, I don't know. But you have, like, I mean, most of the costs of a law firm are fixed. No, I mean, the payroll, the salaries, the office. I don't know now with all the situation how that will change. But so how should we face these conversations in terms of costs? Because that's something very common, that someone will tell you, okay, but how can you calculate or estimate the revenue per lawyer or per partner, and what do you suggest in that?
Yeah, look, the short answer is you don't, in terms of and I grew up in this, and we tried to pretend that we made money every 6 minutes and we were able to work out whether a matter was profitable or that sort of stuff. It's not. Speak to the Ron Bakers and the, you know, economists in the world. It's just a furphy. And really the only way of knowing is, you know, at some point in time, whether it's monthly or annually or whatever, that more revenue has come into the firm than I have expenses. Now, that's very trite to say that. I think one of the, if you're going to price up front, you should only have clients who value the services you're providing. And I have to be frank that many of the firms that I've worked with have also looked at their client base and have culled some of their clients that, you know, for whatever reason is not a good fit for their firm, doesn't you know, fit their firm. So many firms, they have lesser clients, but more contented, happier clients, and, you know, fewer clients who appreciate the value they're providing. But time is not a cost. I mean, computers are costs, you know, rent is cost. Time in itself is not a cost. It's just a constant. It's just a restraint that we all have. And it's been a real furphy that I fell into, that, you know, time was a cost. I can't capture time. I don't have a time machine or what have you. And just the other thing I'd say, Oscar, and, you know, recording timesheets are inherently inaccurate and non-transparent. It's not some perfect, even with the, you know, that we can exactly capture time. I mean, we forget to put down as time as much as we, you know, write up time. So you know, we tend to put down the time we think something should take or did take. So it's never accurate. It's not transparent. Let's be frank. Also, I have to say, you know, query in these days how ethical it is if you don't give your clients options that I think, and I've been on record of this, every law firm on the planet could price their services upfront. They just choose not to. Now, whether they can price them to make a profit and at a price acceptable for their client, I do understand that, but we could all, other industries do it. And for those that say it's not scalable, I mean, look at the McKinseys of the world, you know, one of the most profitable, biggest consulting firms in the world. They don't price by time. And there's plenty of other organizations out there that don't price their services, sorry, that don't bill their services by time. So if I was talking to your accountant, I'd just be saying, well, it's not a cost. Give me a fixed price, and you know, if you can't do that, maybe you might force me to find another accountant who will. Or you know, we believe that you should give some service guarantee or even a price guarantee with your clients. And some firms give a guarantee, well, you know, this is what we've agreed to do. This is the value we've agreed to do it, the price we've agreed. If at the end of the day, you don't think that we've created the value that we thought, let's have a discussion about the fees or pay us what you think we're worth. And again, that is a great guarantee that firms could and I think should give to their clients, particularly their best clients.
Yes, totally agree with that, John. And also, I now want to mention something that you mentioned in your intro, and it's about the awkward conversation. And definitely, it's an awkward conversation. And I fully agree that sometimes lawyers can take it too personal because that's what they're used to, you know. And as a client perspective, what I usually do for very complex issues is that I do a tender process. So as part of that process, I do some Q&As. And one question I ask them is, what value are you adding to my process? What value are you adding to the company? So many times I get like an awkward feeling, you know, because lawyers feel like I'm trying to like not qualify them as I should, you know, trying to like think that they are of less quality by making that question. So on that side, I want to ask you for some tips for in-house lawyers on how to make this approach, how to have these awkward conversations, and which arguments can we use?
And look, you know what I'd say is that just stop asking to see their timesheets or you know, agree the scope of work and the price in advance, and then you don't have to have that awkward conversation, except if your law firm hasn't done what they said they were going to do. I think, and as I said earlier on, I used to hate it when you know, I had that awkward conversation, and thank goodness I don't have to. I find partners in what I call the old law firm model firms, they do take it personally because it reflects, you know, that's their incentives matter, that's their measurement and reward, and I think we have to take away that personally. It's not personal. When you know, it's a business transaction, and that's what it's all about. And we want a trusting business relationship, and so we just and also, I find when you have that if ever had that conversation, it helps me so I'm better next time that you know, you've raised it with me, so I know what to, you know, do things better next time. Maybe I should have, you know, had more conversations with you up front, or kept you informed or advised, or that sort of thing. But I think I wish, and I was speaking to a group of GCs the other day, I wish they would insist more on fees up front. And in fact, I was at a panel with GC, general counsel said to, you know, 200 lawyers in the audience, I've never regretted spending more time up front with my law firm panel members on a matter, but many times I've regretted not spending enough time trying to do scope of value and scope of work with them and then agreeing on that. So I don't have any short answer, except I would be saying try and get your law firms to think, because, you know, if they can do something in a lesser time because they're so good at what they're doing, Veronica, I don't think you should necessarily pay them less. If they're doing terrific value to them, then yeah, pay them what, so they should understand that. But I know the incentives, the measurements and rewards of their law firms, of their own firms, don't dictate that. But I think you can help them change that for them to be better off too. But there are more choices. I can't talk about Peru, but certainly here in Australia, it's a very brave law firm that says to a, you know, very good client, no, we're going to bill by time, because there are plenty of options out there of good lawyers, both in small firms and large firms, that will price their services up front now.
So John, I think we got time for probably one or two more questions. So I'm going to make one last question, and then we'll try to answer one of the many questions we have in the chat that we'll probably share with you later on for probably another meeting where we can talk further about this. So we're talking about pricing here today, but I get the sense, and I feel that you really think that pricing is just one aspect of actually changing the whole business model. You've mentioned old law many times. So my question is, it sort of feels that this is an all or nothing situation. You either get rid of time-based for everything, performance, pricing, and everything else, or you stick to it and try to use it all the time you can. And a question in the chat sort of related to that. What happens with performance, with evaluating associates and everybody based on time? So what's your take on that?
Sure. And look,
other relevant aspects related to the business model that you would say, let's not only look at pricing, what other things should we be reflecting on?
Yeah. So as I said before, incentives matter. So if you measure and reward time, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get time, and you are going to get it in spadefuls. But with firms, and David Wells is online, but I'm not sure if he's able to mention anything. But with the better firms, that has made the change. They measure and reward things that matter to the firm, like, you know, we've talked about outputs, results, outcomes, file velocity, turnaround time, innovation. You know, every law firm says we're innovative. Go into the law firms and ask them, well, how do you measure that? How do you reward your lawyers for innovation? They don't. Repeat clients, refer, you know, a whole range of things. So as I said before, look, I agree it's difficult to be half pregnant. There are a lot of firms that do a hybrid approach to start with. Some find it too hard, I admit, but you've got to hold the line strong. I don't care how good a consultant I am or Ron Baker is or whatever. If there's not strong internal leadership and someone in the firm that actually gets it, it's never going to work. But, you know, I'm not saying we try and eat the elephant all in one bite. You know, you take little small incremental bites, and just a tip, if you really want to increase your prices or the value you're providing to your customer, don't price your own work. Now that may be hard for sole practitioners, I know, but in the firms that I work with, some of them they've had a policy for years. No one person in the firm can price their own work. So before I go out and you know, and price the matter I'm getting, I have to discuss it with someone else in the firm. And why do I say that? Because I'd be brave as a lion, Oscar, pricing your work. Why? Because I don't have to face your client. And I think also, if you can talk to someone within the firm, they can, you know, discuss things about Have you thought of this? Have you, done that? What other value? There is a whole lot of value, I think, that I work with firms that provide value to their clients that actually doesn't cost the client anything. Having a service guarantee, having 24/7 access, if that's what you want for your best clients. It's like selling insurance, it's selling peace of mind, it's selling, making your clients sleep better, a whole lot of things like that that don't cost the firm anything, that particularly for our best clients, we should consider offering. But yeah, you're right. Some of the firms, with the best will in the world, they're trying to change their pricing model, but until they change their measurement reward model, it's really difficult. So we spend more and more time with firms now in terms of, well, what are we going to measure and reward that really matters, both to their clients, but also to the firm.
So John, we have a question from Eduardo Quintana. That it's a very interesting question, and it goes like this. It says, value pricing can produce situations of price discrimination between clients because your fees will depend on different valuations from clients, even if at the end the work probed for each one is the same. If client accepts this situation, then discrimination does not matter. How to manage opportunity costs for top tier lawyers if their fees depend on the perception of value of different clients?
Yeah, look, I make no apologies that we've got to learn better to price our client, not our work. And you may talk about price discrimination. It's really interesting talking about billing by firm, billing by time. You could have this similar client with same work, and yet depending on which lawyer in the firm is doing the work and who they put on it, the time, therefore the fee, is totally different. So I think it's again a furphy to say we don't have that price discrimination. But I make no apologies for that. I mean, if I'm doing work for a multinational company on something, it's not because they've got deeper pockets so much. I'm taking on a greater risk for that firm, and the value to them is perhaps higher than if I'm doing something for just, a small corner businessman, even if the work from our perception is the same. So again, we have to get out of our mindset that it's the work, it's about the value we're providing to the client, even if the work's same. And plenty of firms, and probably plenty online, have what I call menu pricing. That is, the same price for anyone that they advertise for whatever piece of work. I can understand that, but I think we should price, because all clients see value differently. And that's why I say we need a value conversation with our clients. Even the same client sees different pieces of work you do for them differently. And the billable hour treats everything the same, whether I'm opening a letter or whether I'm giving incredible, taxation advice or something on the spot. The billable hours just run everything at the same. So we're overvaluing our services, charging for reading an email or correcting spelling in an email, and we're undervaluing our services because I'm so brilliant, which I'm not, but I can tell Veronica in 2 minutes, because of my experience and expertise, what my competitor may take 3 days to work out. I should not be penalized for that, and good lawyers should not be penalized. It does work better for experts than perhaps generalists, but we should all be specialists at something. That's where we get our passion from. So,
well, thanks a lot, John, for all the relevant and interesting information you've shared with us today. We have a lot of pending questions, I would say, but we're going to write them down, and it will be awesome to have another conversation with you in the future, and to keep digging into this interesting matter of not only pricing, but actually, as we were saying, new business models and the role of the timesheet. And I just wrote in the chat one of the quotes that I really enjoyed in one of the posts in your firm's blog, which was, with timesheets, you think about what's billable. Without timesheets, you think about what's valuable. And I think that's sort of the main or core message that I think you've been one of the proponents of thus far. And we really thank you. And we also thank the university for this space to share these ideas. And we thank everybody who joins us today. You'll find the video in YouTube. So we look forward to another conversation about this topic in the future. Also, thank you to Oscar, Veronica, and to you, John. I don't know if you have any final words before we end the meeting.
No, look, all I'd say is give it a go, give it a crack. Just
That's
you know,
right. Yeah.
take some low-hanging fruit and see what happens. And you know, I think you'll be surprised. And at some stage, you know, the more competent and confident you become, the time just becomes redundant, as I said. And I just think it's a better way of practicing our craft. And with all the competition we have, not just from other law firms, but from other consulting firms, other professionals, it's one way where I think as lawyers, we can really differentiate ourselves and truly get back to the profession and the trust that, you know, we hope our clients will continue to have in us. Because at times we lost that trust, and part of that, I think, was because we changed the business model.